A billionaire secretly watches his deaf children on hidden cameras and witnesses a heartwarming miracle that changes everything. The morning sun glinted off the marble floors of the sprawling mansion, spilling golden light across the grand staircase. From the outside, the world saw perfection: tall iron gates, manicured gardens, luxury cars resting like silent trophies in the driveway. Everything gleamed, everything sparkled. Yet inside, a quiet tension lingered, unnoticed. In a bright, airy living room, two children sat on the soft carpet, their small hands fidgeting as they tried to catch the attention of a parent who was always busy with meetings and calls. Their eyes searched for connection, a simple word, a gentle touch, but all that came was silence. The house was full of laughter from visitors, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of classical music, yet their world was quiet in a way no riches could fix. Why does it feel so lonely even when surrounded by beauty? A camera pans over their small frustrations, one child knocking over a tower of blocks, the other tracing letters in a notebook, unsure if anyone would understand. Their faces show patience worn thin, hope tinged with disappointment. A glance exchanged between them carries more emotion than any conversation ever could. From the hallway, the billionaire watches, seemingly unaware of the struggles inside his own home. Yet even he cannot see everything at once. His thoughts drift to the life he's built, so grand, so enviable, but a quiet unease grows. Am I giving them the love they truly need? He wonders, his hand tightening on the railing as he peers into the living room from a distance. A soft wind blows through the open windows, stirring the curtains and brushing against the children's faces. They respond instinctively, reaching out to feel the movement, the only sound stirring in their world. A dropped toy, a whispered sigh, a hopeful glance. These small moments hold a weight that money and status can never touch. Even the furniture, the sparkling chandeliers, and the polished floors feel distant in comparison to the simple urgent need for understanding and attention. Their tiny struggles, missed gestures, misunderstood expressions, echo in the silent hallways, invisible to anyone who only looks at the surface. And yet, in this quiet struggle, there is a spark waiting to ignite. A longing for connection so deep that it will not be ignored. The children may be silent to the world, but their hearts speak in ways that are unspoken, waiting for someone to truly see them. The camera lingers on a small tender moment. A child looks out the window, watching birds soar freely, and a faint smile crosses their face. Hope, fragile yet present, flickers in the quiet mansion. Sometimes, the greatest wealth is not in gold or marble, but in the love we choose to see. That evening, the mansion felt quieter than usual. The golden lights that once made the house glow now seemed softer, almost thoughtful. In his private study, the billionaire sat behind a wide oak desk, staring at a series of small black devices neatly placed in front of him. Hidden cameras. They were tiny, almost invisible to the eye. But tonight, they carried a heavy purpose. For years, he believed he understood everything about his family. After all, he provided the best schools, the finest doctors, and every comfort money could buy. Yet something from earlier that day refused to leave his mind, the silent frustration in his children's eyes. What was he missing? He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples slowly. Outside the tall window, the city lights shimmered in the distance, but his thoughts were far away from business deals and luxury. Maybe I have been watching the world too much, and not my own children. The next morning, technicians quietly moved through the mansion. They worked carefully, installing the cameras in corners where no one would notice, above bookshelves, near the living room. Ceiling, beside the playroom doorway. Small lenses. Silent observers. The children ran past them without a single glance. To them, the day felt ordinary. But to their father, everything was about to change. Later that evening, the billionaire sat alone in a dimly lit monitoring room. Several screens glowed softly in front of him, each showing a different corner of the house. The living room. The hallway. The kitchen. The playroom. For the first time, he would see their world exactly as it was.
No performances.
No careful smiles meant to please him. Just truth. On one screen, his younger child sat at the table drawing pictures with colored pencils. The child paused for a moment, looking around as if hoping someone might appear to admire the drawing. No one came. On another screen, the older child stood by the window, watching children playing outside in the garden. Laughter echoed faintly from the distance, but inside the mansion, only silence remained. The billionaire leaned forward slowly. His eyes softened as he watched their gestures, small attempts to communicate with each other through expressions, through movements of their hands, through simple looks. It was a language of the heart, but one he barely understood. A quiet question rose in his mind. Had he truly been present in their lives, or only around them? The screens flickered gently in the dark room as moment after moment unfolded. Tiny struggles, quiet patience, silent hopes. For the first time, the billionaire wasn't looking at success reports or stock numbers. He was watching his children. And what he saw was not weakness. It was courage. Every gesture they made was an effort to reach a world that rarely reached back. The billionaire's hand rested on the edge of the desk as he continued watching, his expression slowly changing. The cameras were meant to show him their routine. But deep down, he knew something else was happening. The truth was beginning to reveal itself. And
sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we finally choose to see. The screens in the monitoring room glowed softly in the darkness. One by one, the hidden cameras captured ordinary moments inside the grand mansion. But what they revealed was anything but ordinary. On the living room screen, the younger child sat on the floor with a box of colorful building blocks. Carefully, patiently, the small hands stacked them higher and higher. A tower of bright red and blue slowly rose toward the child's smiling face. For a brief moment, pride filled those young eyes. Then suddenly the tower collapsed. The blocks scattered across the marble floor with a dull clatter the child could not hear. The smile faded instantly. Tiny hands froze in place as the child stared at the mess, shoulders dropping slowly. There was no cry, no shout for help. Only a quiet sigh that barely moved the air. In the monitoring room, the billionaire leaned closer to the screen. Something about that silence felt heavier than any sound. On another camera feed, the older child stood in the kitchen doorway. A glass of juice slipped from small fingers and shattered across the floor. The child jumped back in surprise, wide eyes scanning the room quickly. Panic flashed across their face as they tried to understand what had just happened. The sound of breaking glass meant nothing to them. But the reaction of others always did. The child quickly knelt down, trying to gather the pieces carefully with trembling hands. A few drops of juice stained the white floor, spreading slowly like an unwanted secret. Did I do something wrong again? In the monitoring room, the billionaire felt a strange tightness in his chest. He had seen broken glasses before. He had seen accidents before. But he had never truly seen this. The fear, the confusion, the desperate effort to fix things alone. On another screen, both children sat together at the dining table. One of them tried to explain something using hand gestures, small movements, pointing, expressions full of effort. The other child watched closely, trying to understand. But the message didn't land. The gestures became faster. The expressions grew frustrated. Finally, both children looked down at the table, defeated by a conversation that never fully happened. The silence between them stretched across the room. And suddenly, a painful question filled the billionaire's mind. How many words had been trapped inside their hearts all these years? He sat back in his chair, eyes fixed on the glowing screens. Every clip showed another small moment, another silent struggle. A toy dropped and left untouched. A drawing held up proudly with no one around to see it. A hopeful glance toward a hallway that stayed empty. Inside the mansion that seemed so full of life, two small hearts were quietly learning to live without being heard. The billionaire slowly placed his hand against his lips, his eyes heavy with realization. For the first time, he understood something that money had never taught him. Silence can carry more pain than the loudest cry. The next afternoon, the mansion's front doors opened quietly, and someone new stepped inside. She was not dressed in luxury or surrounded by assistants. No expensive jewelry sparkled on her hands. Instead, she carried a simple leather bag and a warm, patient smile. Her name was Mrs. Elena. To most people in the house, she was just another tutor hired to help the children. But the moment she stepped into the playroom, something about her presence felt different. The hidden cameras captured everything. In the monitoring room, the billionaire watched carefully as Mrs. Elena knelt down so her eyes were level with the children's. She did not rush them. She did not speak loudly or try to force their attention. Instead, She raised her hand slowly. Then she formed a simple shape with her fingers. A sign. The children looked at her curiously. For a moment they only stared. Mrs. Elena repeated the gesture again. Gentle, slow, patient. Her expression remained calm, encouraging them without pressure. Could something so small really change their world? The younger child tilted their head slightly, studying her hand carefully. Then, with hesitant fingers, the child tried to copy the movement. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but Mrs. Elena's face lit up with genuine joy. She nodded proudly and clapped her hands softly in encouragement. The child blinked in surprise, then smiled. In the monitoring room, the billionaire leaned forward. Something had just happened on the screen that he had never seen before. Hope. On the next camera angle, the older child stepped closer, watching the exchange carefully. Mrs. Elena turned toward them and made another simple sign. Her hands moved slowly, like a quiet dance. Again she repeated it. Patient, gentle, inviting. The older child raised their hands uncertainly and attempted the same motion. Their fingers trembled slightly, unsure if they were doing it correctly. Mrs. Elena nodded with warmth and repeated the sign once more. This time the child understood. A spark of excitement flashed across their face. Maybe someone finally understands us. In the quiet monitoring room, the billionaire felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had spent years searching for solutions through doctors, specialists, and expensive programs. Yet here, in a simple playroom, one woman with patience and kindness was unlocking a door he had never known how to open. The cameras continued to capture the lesson. More signs appeared. Simple ones. Hello, friend, play. Each time the children tried, their confidence grew a little more. Their hands moved faster, their faces brighter, and for the first time laughter appeared. Not loud laughter, but joyful expressions that filled the room in their own silent way. The billionaire sat very still, watching every moment unfold. For the first time, since he had turned on those cameras, the mansion no longer felt heavy with silence. Felt alive. And deep in his heart, a quiet realization formed. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with noise or spectacle. Sometimes they arrive with patience, kindness, and a pair of gentle hands willing to teach. The playroom looked the same as it always had. The same soft carpet, the same shelves of toys, the same sunlight pouring gently through the tall windows. But something inside the room had changed. On the monitoring screens, the billionaire watched as Mrs. Elena sat with the children at a small table covered in drawing paper and colored pencils. Her hands moved slowly again, repeating the simple signs they had practiced the day before. The younger child watched closely. Then, carefully, the small hands lifted into the air. 2 fingers curved slightly, a small motion forward. Mrs. Elena's eyes widened with excitement. The sign was clear. Hello. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze in time. The younger child looked uncertain, almost shy, waiting to see if they had done it correctly. Then Mrs. Elena nodded warmly and repeated the sign back. Hello. The child's face lit up instantly. A bright smile spread across those small lips as laughter, silent but joyful, shook their shoulders. In the dark monitoring room, the billionaire blinked in disbelief. He leaned closer to the screen, his hand slowly rising to his mouth. Had he really just seen that? On another camera angle, the older child was watching carefully. Their eyes moved from Mrs. Elena's hands to their sibling's excited face. Curiosity sparked. Slowly, the older child raised their hands and tried a new sign Mrs. Elena had just shown them. Friend. The fingers hesitated at first, unsure. Then the sign formed clearly. Mrs. Elena gasped softly with pride and nodded again. The younger child clapped their hands excitedly, repeating the sign back. Friend. Friend. The room suddenly filled with a new kind of energy. The children were no longer struggling in silence. They were talking. Their hands moved quickly now, experimenting with the new language like explorers discovering a hidden path. Small mistakes made them laugh. Correct signs made their faces glow with pride. Even their eyes seemed brighter. Could this really be the beginning of something so powerful? The billionaire sat frozen in his chair, his heart pounding quietly. For years, he believed their silence was a wall that could never be broken. But now, he was watching that wall slowly crumble. Mrs. Elena wrote a simple word on a sheet of paper and showed it to them. Family. Then she gently formed the sign. Both children watched closely. The younger one tried first, clumsily shaping the sign with careful fingers. The older child followed. Their movements weren't perfect, but the meaning was unmistakable. Family. Drawing of a heart. The children looked at it curiously. Then Mrs. Elena slowly raised her hands. Her movements were calm and clear. She placed one hand gently over her chest and formed a simple sign. Love. She repeated the sign again, slowly, carefully, as if giving the moment space to breathe. The younger child watched closely. Their eyes moved between the picture card and Mrs. Elena's hands. Then, very slowly, the small hands lifted. The child pressed one hand against their chest, just like Mrs. Elena had done. But the fingers hesitated. The motion stopped halfway. Uncertainty filled the child's face. Was it right? Would it be understood? Mrs. Elena smiled softly and nodded with encouragement. The child tried again. This time the sign was clear. Love. The moment hung quietly in the air. The older child noticed immediately. Their eyes widened with excitement. They quickly repeated the same sign. Love. Then something unexpected happened. The older child turned toward the younger one and signed again, this time pointing gently toward their sibling. Love. The younger child froze for a second, surprised. Then laughter spread across their face like sunlight breaking through clouds. They signed back. Love. In the monitoring room, the billionaire's breath caught in his throat. He leaned forward slowly, his eyes locked on the screen. What he was witnessing felt bigger than a lesson. It felt like a miracle unfolding in silence. But the moment wasn't finished yet. Mrs. Elena gently pointed toward the door of the playroom. Then she made another sign. Father. Both children turned their heads instinctively toward the hallway, even though the door remained closed. Then the older child raised their hands again. Carefully, slowly, they combined the two signs they had just learned. Father. Love. The younger child followed. Father. Love. The message was simple, but its meaning carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. In the dark room, the billionaire's vision blurred as tears filled his eyes. They were always speaking. I just never knew how to listen. For years, silence had surrounded their family like an invisible wall. But now, on a glowing screen in the quiet of night, that wall had completely disappeared. Not through sound, not through words, but through something far more powerful. Understanding. And in that silent playroom, two small hands had just spoken the loudest truth their father had ever heard. The monitoring screens were still glowing in the dark room, but the billionaire was no longer sitting. For several minutes, he had been staring at the moment his children signed those two simple words. Father. Love. Those silent gestures echoed louder in his heart than anything he had ever heard in his life. Slowly, he stood up from the chair. His hands trembled slightly as he turned toward the door. The quiet hum of the monitors faded behind him as he stepped into the hallway of the mansion. Each step toward the playroom felt heavier than the last. For years, he had built walls of success around himself. Meetings, deals, responsibilities. But now, he realized how far those walls had placed him from the two small hearts waiting just a few rooms away. At the playroom door, he paused. Through the glass panel, he could see them inside. Mrs. Elena sat beside the children while they practiced more signs, their hands moving slowly as they tried to remember each one. Their faces looked brighter now, lighter, alive with something he had not seen before. Hope. His hand rested on the door handle. A quiet thought passed through his mind. What if they don't understand me, even now? But then he remembered the signs he had just seen on the screen. Father. Love. Slowly he pushed the door open. The room fell still. The children turned their heads toward the sound of movement, their eyes widening. When they saw him standing there, for a moment no one moved. The billionaire took a careful step forward, his voice barely above a whisper even though he knew they could not hear it. But his eyes spoke everything. Tears shimmered in them. Mrs. Elena gently smiled and motioned to the children. Then she made a familiar sign. Father. The younger child looked at her hands, then at the man standing in front of them. Recognition spread across their face. Suddenly, the small hands lifted, a little uncertain, but determined. Father. The sign appeared clearly in the air between them. The billionaire felt his chest tighten as emotion rushed through him. He dropped to his knees so he was at their level, his arms opening slowly. For a brief moment, the children hesitated. Then both of them rushed forward at once. They wrapped their arms around him tightly, their small hands gripping his shirt as if they never wanted to let go. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he held them close. Years of silence, distance, and misunderstanding melted away in that single embrace. The older child pulled back slightly and looked into his eyes. Then, carefully, they signed something again. Father. Love. The younger child repeated it, smiling through watery eyes. Love. The billionaire nodded, his own hands lifting slowly as he tried to copy the sign he had seen earlier. His fingers moved clumsily, but the meaning was clear. Love. And in that quiet playroom, surrounded by sunlight and silent laughter, a broken connection was finally healed. Not through words, but through the language of the heart. The mansion still stood proudly behind its tall iron gates, just as it always had. The gardens were still perfectly trimmed. The marble floors still reflected the sunlight pouring through the tall windows. But inside the house, everything had changed. What was once a quiet mansion filled with silent distance had now become a home alive with movement, connection, and warmth. In the living room, the two children sat on the soft carpet with colorful books spread around them. Their small hands moved quickly in the air, forming signs as they laughed together. What once looked like confusing gestures had now become a beautiful language flowing naturally between them. Across the room, the billionaire sat watching them. Not from a dark monitoring room this time, but right beside them. A notebook rested on his lap, filled with careful drawings of sign language symbols. His fingers moved slowly as he practiced the signs he had been learning every day. Sometimes he made mistakes. Sometimes his hands formed the wrong shapes. But each time he tried again, the children giggled and corrected him with patient smiles. Their laughter filled the room in a way that needed no sound to be understood. Was this the same house that once felt so empty? Mrs. Elena stood nearby, watching the moment unfold with quiet pride. The lessons had grown stronger each week. The children were learning quickly, signing full ideas, sharing stories, expressing feelings that had once been trapped inside their hearts. The younger child suddenly stood up and ran toward the window. Outside, birds flew across the bright sky. Excitedly, the child turned back and began signing quickly to the others. Bird. Fly. Happy. The older child nodded eagerly and repeated the signs. Bird. Fly. Happy. The billionaire watched carefully, then raised his hands to join the conversation. His movements were slower, more careful, but he managed to form the same signs. Bird. Fly. Happy. The children's faces lit up instantly. For a moment, the three of them sat together, smiling as their hands moved in the quiet language that had changed their lives. The billionaire looked at his children with soft, thoughtful eyes. All this time, the miracle was never about fixing silence. It was about learning to listen differently. He once believed success meant building towers of wealth and power, but now he understood something far greater. True success was sitting on the living room floor with the people you loved, finally able to share the simplest feelings together. The hidden cameras were no longer needed. The truth they revealed had already transformed everything. And in the peaceful mansion filled with silent laughter and moving hands, a new story had begun. One built not on riches, but on patience, understanding, and love. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not something that suddenly appears. Sometimes it is something that quietly grows, once we finally open our hearts to see it. Moral: the most powerful miracles happen when love learns how to understand.